Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Sydney Game Developers Meetup for this month. This is our final month of the year, obviously our final meetup for the year as well. Before we get started and we have a chat with Elise, I just wanted to fill you in on how we're changing things in the coming year. So those of you who have been to the Wargaming Sydney Kitchen and been to one of our meetups there, you'll be very glad to hear that we're coming back next year. We are going to start doing physical events again. We'll be limiting the numbers at the start, probably 15 to 20 actually in the kitchen, but then we'll also be keeping this digital version going as well. So yes, good news, the pizzas are coming back. I do want to also just very quickly thank all the people who have presented this year. Obviously we took, I think, about a year and a half off because of COVID. We were able to come back thanks to, a couple of people who very, very kindly gave up their time to present at the events, these digital ones we started doing. So we had Lee Harris, Bilal Akil, Tim Gerdo, Andrew Shellshear, who are all part of the Wargaming Sydney crew. We had Mitch McCausland from Blowfish Studios as well. He gave a fantastic talk. And then that brings us to tonight. And we have Elise, who is going to, well, what I think it sounds like a very, very good talk. I'm looking forward to it personally. So Elise, in case you don't know, she's a very experienced game producer. She's got, I think, over 15 titles credited to her. She's currently working with Avalanche Studios on their new title, Contraband, which you may have seen the teaser for. And as well, she's supporting a local team, Ghost Pattern, on their upcoming title, Wayward Strand. But that's enough for me. I'm sure you want to hear this sort of stuff from Elise. So I'm going to let her tell you all about herself and tell you all about the differences and similarities between indie, AA, and AAA production. Elise, over to you.
Awesome. Hello. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I have my presentation ready about different types of production. I'll give you a bit of a backstory as to me as a producer, sort of how I got into video game development, into production, what my background is as far as the titles and the kinds of companies I've worked on, and as to why I am giving this talk because of those experiences. So my talk is called The Three Starter Types of Production, Indie, AA, and AAA. So a little bit about me and about my history. So I went to school here in Melbourne, a small school called King David. I didn't really know exactly what I wanted to do when I finished high school, so I applied for a bunch of different universities and got a scholarship for a games degree and thought, oh, that sounds fun. I could make video games. What else am I going to do? I'm 17, so let's give it a shot. So I went to Quantum SAE and I got a Bachelor of Interactive Entertainment with a major in games design. So I knew I was interested in the games industry, but I didn't know exactly where I thought I would fit. So I decided to go for the games design degree because it sort of had a little bit of everything. So I could try my hand at programming, at games design, at 3D modeling. And I thought that was a good way to get my introduction before I sort of figured it out. I finished the degree and learned a lot, but still didn't necessarily know where I fit or what I wanted to do. So I finished university. I still had bills to pay. So I started working at EB Games and I became an assistant manager there. So that was sort of where I started to dip my toe in the management pool per se. And I was working across Swanston Street and Melbourne Central. So very quickly, I was used to big, quick-paced city stores. And then I worked there for a year or so. And then I was actually lucky enough that Big Ant Studios, who are primarily known as a sports studio, came into the store I was working at to present their newest title, which felt like too good of an opportunity to miss out on, that I don't have to go to game developers. They're seemingly coming to me. So that's it. Felt like a good sign. So I talked to Big Ant and there was a few back and forths a couple of months later figuring out what a good position was, but they actually came to me with an assistant producer role open, which was really exciting. I'd never really heard about production all that much. I never really got told about it at university, so I didn't really know what I was in for, but it was a games job, so I just said yes. So Big Ant Studios is what I would deem a AA studio, 40 to 50 people, primarily externally published for the beginning. It ended up being a self-published studio for a while in my last year or so. But during this time, I released lots of games. This is just a small snippet. But yeah, primarily sports games, a few other types. We did the Jetpack Joyride port, a sort of Batman-style combat game called Masquerade. I was the only producer at the company besides a development director. So with about 40 or 50 people, we would have primarily one project we were working on, but still 2 or 3 others usually happening simultaneously, whether that was a smaller mobile game or a couple of final patches for the previous game. But it was a very quick turnaround, mostly sports games. The production challenges, I suppose, were quite unique here because they were sports games. We already knew somewhat of what we were making. Like, we didn't have to start from absolute scratch to figure out what the rules were. We know what the rules of cricket are. It's just how we're going to pull it off as an interesting and exciting game. So it was actually quite a good way to break into the industry because I didn't have to learn every single step along the way. I still had to go from, concept to release, but we didn't have as many of the challenges that other companies might have in the, let's say, pre-production stage. So I was there for about 2 years, and then I moved on to Samurai Punk, which is a very much an indie team based out of Melbourne in the arcade. So while I was working there, we were alternating between about 7 to 10 people. Some were really quick games, like 2-3 months from concept to release. Some were in development for a lot longer. We worked on some ports. So we did the Switch and PC port for Florence. And then we also supported other teams with, for example, Table of Tales, working on a VR title. So we had a couple of more long-running games, but also a lot of prototypes, a lot of game jams. And so this was sort of the complete opposite of Big Ant in that regard, because many games started with absolutely no idea what we were making. So that was a lot of really interesting challenges of trying to figure out how to produce a game without really knowing what the game was, but still wanting to support your team. But striking that really fine balance between creative freedom and also not shutting the company down because we have no money because we've just been making fun things for 2 years. Oh, okay. Is that better? Does that work now? Okay, cool. Not a mysterious blob. Okay, cool. Sorry about that. But yeah, so at Samurai Punk, every project felt pretty different, and it was actually a lot of exciting challenges because it kind of felt like starting from scratch every time. So I was never really able to just sit back and relax and go through the motions. There was always new challenges, which I really enjoyed. So I was at Samurai Punk similarly for about 2 years, and then I moved on to my current projects. So I work with Avalanche Studios, who, yes, Silent but Deadly. That was a very fun prototype about covering your fart sounds by making sounds in the workroom. It was very fun. So yeah, Avalanche Studios group, so known for games like Mad Max, Rage, Just Cause. So this is my first foray into big, world-renowned AAA, which has been really exciting. I've been there for about 7 months now. And while I'm working there, I can't quite shake the desire for a little indie darling hit. So I am also working with the Ghost Pattern team on Wayward Strand. It is just a game I believe so wholeheartedly in that I just couldn't give up the opportunity to work with them even for a little bit. So the team on Ghost Pattern are similar, like 5 to 10 people with a core team and some contractors. And I'm coming in to this project sort of at the later stage. So the game has been worked on for 4 or 5 years now. So the challenge is how to get this game kind of out the door, which is sort of a little bit of an easier challenge as far as production. It's usually that end stage is a little bit easier to manage rather than early prototyping phases. And then at Avalanche, I can't really say too much. We announced our game at E3. It's called Contraband. That's kind of all I can say about that. Awesome. So just to take a step back and go into a little bit of the definitions. So an indie team or an indie game, short for independent, usually a studio or a game that is a smaller group of people, and they usually don't have the financial backing of a really large AAA publisher. A lot of the time, no publisher at all. So as far as a starter, I have associated indie with Charmander. My reasoning is because indies are a little bit feisty and fiery, but maybe accidentally set some things on fire by accident every once in a while. So for the rest of the talk, Charmander is our indie studio. Then AA, sort of very much the in-between of indie and AAA, an independent studio, usually backed by a big publisher, that sort of provides the studio and the game with a bit of stability and usually quite a sizable financial backing. So I have associated AA with Squirtle, starting to grow a little bit of a hard shell, getting a little bit better at putting out fires, and really starting to learn how to swim. So when we see Squirtle, that's AA. And then AAA, being a major video game publisher or massive studio, usually quite well known around the world, and in terms of budget, very much on the high end of intimidating numbers. So Bulbasaur, learning how to hide some tricks up your sleeve, or in this case, in your back, sort of a little hidden pocket of a lot of really great tools, but also some sharp teeth. So look out for those. Sort of listed some pros and cons along the way, but they're not too critical besides the high level summary. So when it comes to production, this is the question that everything sort of has to keep coming back to. I see a lot of, especially like junior producers, falling into the same trap of trying to fix things or adjust without really either understanding what the problem is or ensuring that there is a problem. Production, I think, is a lot of the time seen as a very straight process, and these are the steps you follow, and you got to stick to agile 100%, and I don't think that's true, and I've never stuck to that philosophy. I think the best producers are creative and adaptable and will make something fit if they need to. But yeah, if you are going into a studio as a producer, you want to make sure that you're asking yourself this question, because if there isn't a problem to solve, then you don't need to change it. Even if it doesn't stick to what you read in a book, if it works, it works. And you don't want to cause too much chaos there. As far as identifying problems and really looking into it, the second stage there is ensuring that you know exactly what the problem is. So an example that I've faced before is you go into a studio and people aren't using Jira properly. And so they don't update their tasks. It's hard to keep a track of what is actually happening. So the initial response would probably be like hassle the team, tell them to use Jira more, and just keep emphasizing it, maybe sending a Slack message every morning, hey, remember to update your Jira. But maybe there's a deeper problem there. Maybe they don't know how to update their tasks, or maybe they're just really not confident with Jira, and that's why they're not using it. Or maybe they're all really overworked and just Jira is the last thing they can think about because they're just trying to get their bugs fixed. So until you really know what the core of the problem is, you can't really put through a correct solution. So this is my number one. What is the problem that you're actually trying to solve? So a lot of this talk is about Jira. I know that's very typical. I didn't put any spreadsheets in here, so I'm changing it up a little. Jira is my bread and butter. I've used it for almost every studio. It's my preferred software. I know that people will prefer Trello or Handsoft or whatever. Mine specifically will be about Jira. There are free plans available for smaller teams. So if you're working in an indie studio, you don't necessarily get all the tools, but it's still a really good software to use. So personally, the reason why I like Jira is because I think it balances out the back-end customization. I'm not going to be able to say that word. The back-end customization that producers often really like to use, but it's still more or less user-friendly. So things like Trello, for example, I think are really user-friendly, but as a producer, I don't really get the information that I need. And I think Handsoft tends to go the other way. It's really good at reporting, really good for producers, but not as nice for the end user. And that's where you want to always strike that balance. producers want to have 3,000 reports and everything automated and amazing. But at the end of the day, if your team's not using it, you're not going to be getting the information that you actually want. So it's all about balancing those two sides together. When you are using Jira or really any software, especially if you're coming in as a producer to a new team and sort of starting the Jira process, just make sure you take the time to teach your team. I think a lot of producers think it's, super easy to use and you just jump in and everything is fine, but it's not necessarily that way. So just make sure you're taking the time to teach your teams. So as far as specific Jira topics I am going to go into, we've got automation, epics, retrospectives, boards, filters, and dashboards. So I'm going to go into a little bit of detail about all of these, how I think they're best utilized across indie, AA, and AAA, sort of where there are similarities, what pitfalls to look out for. So we start with automation. I actually only discovered this tool probably in the last year or so, and it was just a moment of like, oh my God, how many problems could have been solved if I had known about automation? So I highly recommend looking into this tool. It's amazing. It's basically just a process that takes a lot of pressure off you and removes the need for a lot of more micromanagey kind of tasks. So you can create custom rule sets that can automate activity in Jira as well as communicate outwards. So if you have a plugin for Slack, you can have an automation tool that goes from Jira and can send messages to Slack or send emails out. Yeah, it's incredible. So this image here is an example of like an individual automation rule. And then this is an example of what it looks like when you have a lot of different rules, all filtered, specific owners. You can categorize them, you can really easily enable them and disable them, and you can also duplicate them. So if you want the same thing with slight variations, you can just duplicate and adjust slight values. Whoop, sorry. So indie team. So since you're a small team, you can utilize automation for smaller messages. So for example, at Ghost Pattern, we have one that just says a new sprint has started. That just goes into the whole team channel, and it just makes sure that everyone knows the new sprint has started. Go in, update your tasks, especially while we're in this situation where everyone is working remotely, often at different times in the day. It just takes that pressure off of having to send a message that might get missed or trying to coordinate with everyone. Jira just does it for me. I can just start the sprint and I don't have to worry about communicating it. However, for indie teams specifically, I wouldn't recommend using automation for bigger achievements. Because you're in a small team and things often progress slowly, you want to really celebrate your wins. So it could be easy to just set a rule that the sprint has ended, everything's fine. But in a small team, it's really important to be that pillar of like joy whenever you can. Producers are often known for the person who says no and doesn't let people do what they want to do. So take any excuse to be the champion and be someone that people can celebrate. So yeah, avoid big celebrations through automation. For AA, a lot of AA kind of, naturally overlaps indie and AAA. So it can be really hard to define what is perfect for this specific size. It will really depend on your team and who you're working with. But generally speaking, as the team starts to grow, communication will inevitably be missed. So you want to focus on these elements specifically, especially if you're in the team from sort of the indie stage and growing it up. You need to be really aware of where communication lines start dropping and really try and focus on that. So usually that's small day-to-day communications that are really hard to stay on top of, especially in a time-sensitive manner. So lean in there and get Jira to do the work for you. The example I've got here is like automatically sending QA a message when a bug is fixed. So you can set a specific type of Jira task. So instead of a task or a deliverable, you can make it a bug. And then that way you can set your rule to say when when a bug is set as resolved, you can have an automatic message that sends to, let's say, the QA Slack channel that says, hey, this bug is resolved. Can someone verify it? And you can even put little messages in it as well. And then with the automation, you can also reassign them. So you can cover all your bases. So once a bug is resolved, it'll automatically reassign to, let's say, the QA team or someone specifically in QA. And then you don't have to do anything. A bug has been fixed. Jira takes care of the rest and makes sure that people know about it. For AAA, sorry, I have to kind of look this way for a bit. But yeah, useful for pipelines and useful for communication. The point of encouragement that I mentioned in indie doesn't really carry across in AAA. You generally can't afford to celebrate all the tiny little wins. And it sounds bad, but like a lot of the time people don't really care. If someone's been making video games for 30 years, they don't care that they finished a milestone. They've completed many over the years. So this is where we come back into that personal aspect. Maybe you have a smaller team that you're really close with and you can celebrate the wins with them. Otherwise, when it becomes more of a regularity, just let Jira handle it for you. So, you know, some other examples of even emails, like sending out an email when a milestone has been finished. So you're still acknowledging it. You just don't have to handwrite an email on the last day of a deliverable when you probably have a million other things to do and you're setting up the next milestone sprint. Jira can just send out an email. Hooray, we did it. Milestone is complete. When it comes to automation in these specific teams, I'd also recommend leaning into the personal needs of directors and other leadership. The process is very customizable. So for example, if you have a ticket that has a component on it that says concept art, every time that card gets completed, you can auto redirect it to the lead artist or the art director, and then they can do feedback, give approval. And if they don't have a lot of tasks, they'll just have a column in Jira that has for review, and they can always go into Jira and just see what work there is to review and stay on top of it, as opposed to a bunch of people sending messages saying, hey, my work is ready for review, can you review it? And it just gets lost. Epics. So this is where all the producers in the chat are going to get really angry at me for not using them the way you're meant to use them, but trust me, it works. So epics in general are just like large bodies of work that can be broken down into smaller chunks. They usually span across multiple disciplines. So rather than just having all your tasks assigned to one person, epics are generally used when there's all different people working on the same thing collectively, and it gives you a better high-level view of what is happening. So as an indie, I love using epics as deadlines, which is not necessarily what they're used for, but I think it's great. When you're in a small team, you don't necessarily need to use epics in a complex way. So having deadlines doesn't messy your Jira. So I have an example image here. If you can imagine, like invite and share is just like PAX 22 build. So really easily as a producer and as a team, we can all look at a backlog and see how much work is left and where it is super, super easily. And then you'll see like all issues at basics, all of here. Once you've started doing the work, it starts filling up as well. So it's really easy to monitor, like, are we half of the way there? Have we even started? Are we getting really close? So as long as you're tagging all your cards with these specific epics, it is a very, very good tool for a high level view of how far away you are from the goal that you're trying to hit. In general, I think this comes back to what I mentioned before of like producers being creative and coming up with new ways to do things. I've, studied project management, read all the books, and half the time I have to throw them out the window because as much as I want to follow the rules, if my team isn't using it, it's completely pointless. So you want to balance a little bit of teaching the team like good project management practices and individualization that actually works for the team. So for AA, this is the most obvious example of like a little bit of indie, a little bit of AAA. Depending on how big your team is, you can still utilize deadlines. But as soon as you're using epics on a larger scale, it just starts to become messy if you're using them for different reasons. But an example here would be like career mode, which is very common in our sports games. So although it'll primarily be handled by a programmer implementing it, you also need a designer for balancing all the gameplay mechanics and all the values and how much money you earn and what tournaments you go to. You need a UI artist to make concepts. You need a UI programmer to implement them. There's all these different little bits and pieces that feed into career mode. And epics, again, is a really good way of seeing it from a high level view. You can get separate reports by epic, so you can monitor how the team is tracking towards this feature. All of these are sort of essential for understanding your ship dates for everything, because once you start to fill out these epics, you can really easily see like this epic based on these 7 Jira cards should take 10 work days, or another one once you put all the correct cards and label them with the epic will say this is going to take 3 months. And that really helps kind of get everything in one place and understand how long everything should take. Once you're getting into AAA territory, do not use deadlines. Everyone will yell at you. If you're working with other producers, they will mock you. Do not use it there. Your Jira is complex enough. Your deadlines are far away enough that a deadline could be a year, and it's just not useful to see it on that high level in the same way. Epics start to really shine when they're used correctly in multiple teams. So when I'm working with different producers, instead of needing to constantly check in with other producers to see how their work's coming along or how their team's component of this is coming along, I can just go onto Jira and I can select an epic and it will show me all the breakdowns, how far along it is and where everyone's status is. So retrospectives is the next one. Noting that I normally use Confluence for retrospectives, which is just another Atlassian tool, but this is what it looks like in Jira. So it's basically what went right, what went wrong, and then usually what could be improved or what were we confused about. It's a really good chance for the team to sit down and discuss what has happened. Generally, it's run by one person who documents everything, but everyone should share their opinions and thoughts. So this is a little bit more usually on the emotional side than your standard task management, but it gives the team a chance to air their grievances. But the important part for a producer specifically is to find what the actionables and the lessons are from that. People often don't speak up in a milestone if they're not happy with something or they feel like something is going in the wrong direction. So having having retrospectives is a really good chance to let them do that. Generally speaking, I'll link up retrospectives to the sprint length. In indie teams, I've almost always used 2-week sprints. So every 2 weeks, we sit down and we have a retrospective. Normally 1 to 2 hours, absolute max. You don't want to spend too much time on it. And yeah, it just gives you a chance to hear what the entire team is thinking and feeling. And at the end of the day, you're never going to know the intricacies of what their work has entailed. So this is the place where they tell you. I generally put them on Fridays at around 2 p.m. so that we've got the team all in one place. Usually that doesn't happen very often. So it kind of lends itself well to, and now that we're finished with retro, let's all eat pizza and be relaxed because we've just kind of had a nice, honest moment with each other. Depending on where you're at in your game, I'd also recommend getting a build prepared beforehand. So if you're having a 2-hour retro, you can have an hour of playing the build, making sure that everyone actually knows where the state of the build is. And then you can discuss sort of what went right, what went wrong, all of that. For AA, very much milestone based. When you're having a team of about 50 people, it's not very realistic to sit down every 2 weeks and talk about how everyone's feeling. So I would say, generally speaking, put it on a milestone basis, which on average, I would say, 3 or 4 months. And you want to book closer to maybe like half a day or even a day, depending on how long the milestone was. It's a good chance for everyone to be heard. And also it's one of the few meetings where you'll have all of leadership and everyone else in the team. And it's really important to capture that dynamic. AAA retros get really tricky. Now we're talking 300 people split across 7 different time zones, working on all different aspects of the project. So having those people all in a room telling you what went wrong is painful. So I wouldn't recommend it. There are a couple of different ways that you can do it in AAA. I've got a few examples. So you can do purely a management retrospective. So just the leadership team come in, and from their higher level perspective of the team, they talk about what went right, what went wrong. Otherwise, you can do the same process, but prior to that, each leader, producer, whatever, sits down with their team and does like a mini retro. So they capture their team's views and make sure that their thoughts are heard. Then they take it up into the leadership retro. Alternatively, you can do asynchronous retros. So every person in the team in their own time fills out 3 to 4 points of each. The producer assembles them, and then you can do a mini retro with the whole team where the producer can just kind of highlight the points. It reduces the amount of repetition of 17 people saying this one tech issue blocked us. No one has time for that. So the producer can just assemble it, create a cleaner list, and then go over it with the team, clearly establishing what the actionables and takeaways are. So making sure that the team knows that you're listening to what went wrong, because that's part of our job, is to make things get better. So we want to make sure we're hearing what they're saying and we're not only telling them how we're going to fix it, but we carry through with that. Retros are really personal to your team. So this is sort of the way that I've run them, but just talk to your team and see what they like. You can do a retro about a retro to see how they like the format and work from there. Cool. So Jira boards. Generally speaking, there are sort of 2 structures in Jira, which is Kanban and Scrum. Kanban is more of your Trello visual look. Focuses on continuous work, so it's not multiple sprints the way that Scrum is. For my presentation, I'll be talking from the Scrum perspective because that's what I use the most. For boards, you create all your different filters that you need and all your work appears. So you can create as many as you want, but this is my recommendation. So for an indie team, you're working at a small team, most people are very head down with their work. So the programmer on your team probably doesn't talk that much to the artist. So having one board is a really good way to make everyone see what everyone else is working on. When you're working with 10 people, you could have, let's say, 20 or 30 cards in total for a 2-week sprint. You don't need to have that separated. It's actually good to maybe to have everyone look at other people's work, because they'll be able to give them opinions. If the artist is working on some mechanic, like the concept art for it, the programmer can have a quick look at that card and be like, actually, that's not what I'm programming at all. And now you found a problem. So stick to one board, don't overcomplicate it, allow for visibility. AA, I'd say 1 to 5, very much depending on how many producers you have on your team. But fundamentally, once the team starts to grow, the boards get more complicated. So you can split them up into multiple ways, by department, by feature, by deadline. Again, it's what works for you and what works for your team. I personally use them for departments. So it's worth noting, you can use filters. So for example, if you have a filter that's like code, you can just click that, but it's one extra step. And I think a lot of production is the path of least resistance and making it as easy as possible. So even one extra click could be the thing that confuses someone and they miss the key information. So an example scenario of you sit down with your lead programmer and you want to go through the backlog and assign the next 3 months, which is your next milestone of work. By having a board that's just a code board where you've put a filter in to say only programmers' tasks get put in this board, you can super easily see what the work is, and then you don't have to click extra buttons or tag specific people that you want to see. You've got one board that just does it for you. You can do it in multiple ways. So you can have on the back end of Jira, you can flag people as specific roles. So you could say if role equals programmer, then show this board. You can have a tag on cards that say it's a code task. So you can say if the tag equals code, show these results. It's completely customizable, so just do it however it works for you, keeping in mind that some people can be very lazy when they create Jira cards. So if they miss a filter or miss a tag, it could mean that it doesn't show up on your board. So just keep an eye out for that. For AAA, it's pretty much all the boards. Use as many as you think is appropriate. especially when you're working with multiple producers, people like to filter information in different ways. So even if you have two producers that want to see the same team's work, they might still have two separate boards to see the information the way that makes sense to them. So for example, some producers prefer to auto order everything by priority. So their board would be by priority. Whereas I like to see assignee. I like to see what everyone's workload looks like so I can distribute the work fairly. And you can have different boards to make it customizable, and you can star them. So when you go onto Jira, you just have yours and you never have to see anyone else's, and it doesn't cause stress. Cool. Dashboards. Dashboards are a great way to communicate key points of information to the rest of your team. They have so many pre-built modules in Jira, so when you're creating these, you don't have to be particularly good at any code to get the information coming up. It has pie charts, it has all the charts possible. You can have just like images that load GIFs. You can do whatever you want with this. So it's a really great way to highlight pretty much anything, whether it's game sales, sprint velocity, bug counts. Really great tool. For indie teams, similar to before, one dashboard. You don't want to overcomplicate it. Key information and exciting highlights. So similar to what I mentioned before of like be the hero where you can. So show off cool things to your team, whether it's a funny GIF, whether it's some fan art that someone made for one of your games. It's a really great place to put that. I'd also say with indie teams, they don't care as much about production specific information as much as that hurts me. They don't. So put a little bit more like fun and practical things because they don't want to see every chart that you look at on a daily basis. Some practical things would be like work remaining until the deadline or the number and assignee for critical bugs, just the things that are going to make them scared if they don't know about it. But then fun things, yeah, like I mentioned, game sales, positive reviews, fan art, sort of let them see how many critical bugs there are. But look at this pretty artwork. Yay, everything will be okay. For AA, I'd say 3 to 5. So still balancing that key information with exciting highlights. And you can create them for your different departments who will all have different needs. So for example, QA, once you start going to AA, you might have a dedicated QA team, and they're much more interested in something like critical bugs or how many bugs are open versus how many bugs need to be verified so they can stay on top of their job. Meanwhile, programmers might be more interested in which bugs are being reopened and how many times they're being reopened. Especially a lead programmer is going to see that and go, something's going wrong here. Let's not just pass it off as a simple bug. Let's spend some time investigating it. So that's some information that can come out of these dashboards. So when it comes to AAA, it can be a bit of a slippery slope. I do say all the dashboards, and I do mean that, but just be strategic in how you're using them. The need for fun becomes a little bit less important in AAA. You have a lot to communicate with a little bit of space, and you're going to want to use that space as much as possible. Most producers will create their own dashboards for their own teams, but you could also have production-specific dashboards. So when we have our weekly production meetings, we can have a dashboard, so we don't have to come prepared with information. We just have a dashboard we go to, and we go, okay, let's discuss these important things that are happening. Dashboards are completely automated, so you don't have to worry about maintaining them. It just extracts the information straight from Jira, so you don't have to type which bugs are critical. It will do all that information for you. Unless something breaks, which it doesn't happen very often, but keep an eye out. But besides that, dashboards are a great tool to just extract important information, and it has the big bonus of completely automated, so you don't even have to worry about it. Once you set it up once, it's there every day ready for you to go. Cool. And I am going to cover a couple of Slack ones as well, just so I don't reinforce the stereotype of producers that talk about literally nothing besides Jira. So a couple of ones I have in here are emojis, channels, and filters. So starting with channels and filters, I think everyone has worked in a team with either an overwhelming amount of channels, or you've got Discord and you can't even remember which emote, which icon represents which Discord channel because you've signed up to so many and now you've just ended up muting all of them. That happens to all of us, and there are some easy ways to make it better. So with Slack especially, I find that it's a really big problem for a lot of my teams where they are concerned that they're spending hours a day just reading Slack messages and half the time they're completely irrelevant to them. So channels and filters have to be used strategically. So you can create filters based on themes. So for example, I will filter my, let's say, lighting and VFX team as one team, but then my tech art team as a separate, those are separate filters. So all the channels that pertain to those groups are in the same area. So if I know that all hell is breaking loose in lighting right now, I know that's the channel and the filter that I should be looking at. When it comes to filtering non-work related things, I have to do that as well. So I have like a fun filter that everything goes into that I use when I need fun, but not at other times, which I know is not as desirable, but it is more practical. It really helps to prioritize what you actually need to read when you come in the morning, especially, you know, Avalanche is a studio not based in Australia, so different time zone. When I sign on to work and I have 50 different channels that are all illuminated, panic starts to go off. But if you've got your filters and you just see the important ones, it's a lot easier. So with this as well, I've added this slide about notifications. So when you have filters, you can use notification types. So for example, all your fun channels won't send you a direct message and send a little like ping pop-up that says that there's a new message. Whereas for your critical ones, you can say like any mention, any message that comes through, I want to know about it and I want to see it come up and I want to be prompted for it. It's just an extra tool to help you actually filter the information that you're looking at. My example was I don't star and put on a notification for the weather channel because I don't necessarily care what the weather in Sweden is right now. It's just going to make me sad that it's snowing. So I just mute it for now. Awesome. So I know generally it's not a cool thing to say, but at the end of the day, a job of a producer is to improve efficiency and make sure that the company doesn't go bankrupt. So it is important to monitor output, which means that you're also monitoring distractions. So there's nothing wrong with having fun channels, but they can't distract the team and they can't take away from their work. So for example, if someone is posting nonstop in like a random channel, doesn't mean you have to get angry at them, but maybe it means they're not engaged with their work and instead they're Googling interesting things about strawberry squids. I did that the other day. They're very fascinating. I'd recommend to Google it. But when the posts aren't about work, you're just going to be taking people out of their focus, which isn't ideal. So ideally, you could use as well your new snazzy automation skills to send messages for specific channels. So that's just another trick. If you're not using channels or filters, you can also use automation so that Jira is processing through. So for example, at Ghost Pattern, we have a weekly summary channel. So it can automate the number of messages that are completed, automate the number of tasks completed in a week, for example, and people don't post a lot in there. So if you are out for a week or 3 weeks, you can come in and check the weekly summary page and just say, oh, that's what happened that week. These are the key things. And then we have one person responsible for going in and writing a hand-authored weekly summary. These are the things that happened. These are the really important dates that we have to remember. And it's a really efficient way of catching people up, especially over holiday breaks. For indie specifically, I would say that if you have so many channels that you need filtering, you're probably doing something wrong. If you've only got 10 people in a team, they don't need 50 different ways to communicate with each other. Keep it compact, maybe have one fun related channel instead of 10. Keep it lean where you can. AA is kind of more or less the same. Be strategic with what is and isn't a work channel. You can utilize filters, but again, you probably don't need to if you're not letting people create channels for literally everything. a good tool as well. If you're creating a temp channel, let's say you're going to PAX Australia and there's a bunch of like marketing and nitty gritty details that need to be hashed out, you can create like a channel that says like temp PAX Australia. And then that way, when you go to Slack, let's say in a month from now, you see the word temp, look at it and go, oh, PAX Australia has already been, we don't need that anymore. Let's archive it. So that's a really good trick to make sure that you don't end up with all these little Slack channels that were necessary at one point, but really don't need to be lingering around and taking up space. In direct contrast to everything I've just said, fun pages and Slack channels are essential for AAA studios. So you're more likely to be working with people that you've never spoken to, that you've never met in real life. But these like fun channels are a really good way to open up those lines of communication and let people bond in a way that they wouldn't necessarily talk at work. So I could be on, for example, my favorite, the cats channel, and I know who has cats and I know whose cat is cute. So in 6 months from now, when I'm having a meeting for the first time with this one person, I already have a bit of a personal touch because we know each other's like cats' names, for example. So in AAA, I'd say go forth and be merry with your fun channels, but just make sure you have filters so that you're not checking them all the time. With the fun, like I said, allow people to be more specific. So instead of a fun channel, have a sports channel, or as specific as like sci-fi movie buffs. You want to get people chatting and you want them to get along. So feel free to go as specific as possible to allow people to create real connections. Another tip with Slack is when you're talking in all these different channels, if you were to say like, oh, yes, I think Paul did this last week, instead of just saying Paul, actually tag the person's Slack ID in there. So not only do they see the notification to check if you're right or wrong, it's also a really handy tip to not getting people's names spelt incorrectly. I work with a lot of Swedes. It's really hard. I don't have like umlauts built into my keyboard. So if I just tag the person, I don't offend anyone by accidentally spelling their name wrong. If they are not in the Slack channel, a notification will come up to say, do you want to invite them to the Slack channel? Do you want to let them know about it? It's just a very, very good process to make sure that everyone involved in a communication loop is actually involved. But yeah, once it comes to AAA, I can't emphasize enough how important filters become, because 50 plus channels is ridiculous and you can't stay on top of all of it. So as producers, you prioritize everyone's work for a living. So make sure you do it for yourself and prioritize what you are reading every day. My last tip is about emojis. Emojis are a really fun way for people to express themselves at work, and it can be in a very efficient way. So if possible, I know that there's like pay barriers on things like Slack and Discord, but if you can allow for custom emojis, it helps the team connect and it just makes it all a little bit more personal. But they can also be really practical. For example, we have a Jira emoji. So if someone goes to report a bug on a QA channel and goes, oh, I saw this, what even is happening? Someone can respond with a Jira emoji, which is common terms to say, go make a Jira card for it. It's not in Jira, go make a Jira. Instead of, oh, hey, can you please make a Jira for it? I know it doesn't sound like a lot, but when you have especially a QA department, like 50 of these coming through a day, it just makes everything a lot more streamlined. My personal favorite at work is we have a thanks emoji, which is my number one emoji that I use. It feels more polite than a thumbs up. And in 2 clicks, I can show that I've read the message, because that's a really frustrating thing, is if you send someone a message and you don't know if they've read it and actioned on it and just didn't respond, or if they've never seen it. So thanks emoji, 2 clicks. I said thanks. They know I saw it. All is right in the world. And the fun part about emojis, all levels. Indie, AA, AAA, there's no rules here. Use all the emojis, use as many emojis, use them at every level, use emojis. So always coming back to this question of what is the problem we are trying to solve. If you take away from this talk, emojis and automation and dashboards, that's great. Just make sure you know what problem you're trying to solve first. And then that way you can actually use these tools in an efficient way. And that is me. Thank you so much for listening to my talk.
Okay, Elise, do you want to put your camera big so we can see you better. If anyone has any questions for Elise, now is the time to start sending them through. I do have one question for you already. We had a question come through from Sergey Makes a Game. Would 1 to 2 hours of retrospective, especially if it's fortnightly, end up not being focused enough, since discussions bike shedding might start or people might get emotional fatigue?
So I don't think so. I think an important part there is acknowledging when something needs a separate meeting. So if people are getting really involved because your source control is completely broken and it's making it impossible and everyone is stomping each other's work, that's not actually a discussion for a retro. You take that into a separate meeting, go, that's a really important point. Now's not the time to discuss it. Let's chat about it. Look at your calendar on Wednesday. I booked a 2-hour meeting for the important stakeholders in this to have a conversation about this specifically. So you don't want to move people. You don't want to have everyone in a room listening to a conversation that's not necessary for them. And I think that's generally where the fatigue comes in. I think if people are invested in the conversation and the topics that are happening, they're going to want to stick to it and be engaged.
How big is your team at Avalanche and how many producers do you work with?
I'm unfortunately not able to disclose the team size that I work with. I'm sorry.
That is absolutely understandable. So one question which I had just while we're waiting on other people sending through their questions, how, with your experience, how did you find it moving through the different levels? Like when you went from an indie to a AA, when you went from a AA to a AAA, how much adjustment did you have to make as a producer?
A lot, every stage, but you have to adjust with every team no matter what the changes are. So even the difference of going from Samurai Punk, an indie team, to Ghost Pattern, another indie team, it's completely different people with completely different needs. So you're going to find change at every stage. But I think personally for me, I do start to feel like a cap of how productive and how much I can learn with teams, which so far for me has been about 2.5 to 3 years, which is generally why why my career has looked like AA and then indie and then AAA, is because I want to keep learning and I want to see what I've learned and be like, cool, let's apply it to something different and see how that works, what breaks, what sticks. And over time, I'm getting progressively better at identifying these patterns and what works for different team structures.
Okay, we have one question from Eric Still. So far, AAA has sounded like a no fun allowed coordination and communication nightmare. What are some of the good parts of production in AAA?
So I guess without saying much, I can say that I am now working with other producers. I won't say how many, but that's the first time I've ever done that in my career. So that's super exciting to me because previously I have to try a process and just learn through doing versus being able to talk to someone else and being like, I think I'm going to try this. And they can say, this will work because of XYZ, or this won't work because of these reasons. And there's still a little bit of testing there, right? Like if your parents are like, don't do that, that's a bad idea. You're like, I'm going to do it and I'm going to prove you wrong. And so that still kind of happens. And you want to have your individual test cases, even if people tell you it might not work. But I don't know. I think it's exciting. I personally don't do well when things are calm. I need like 50 fires happening everywhere for me to feel like I'm useful. And so there is definitely no shortage of fires in AAA. Like there are so many people and so many things are happening, and there's just so many more communication loops to keep track of. And it's I don't know. I think to me, it's kind of like, does anyone like Dark Souls? Yes, it's a huge game. People like struggling. Like it's kind of struggling in this context. Like it's exciting to go up the difficulty ranks and see if you're actually as good as you think you are. So I think there's a lot of that. And then just generally with financial supports that come with AAA, there's a lot more money in career development of, like leadership training, things like that you can't necessarily get the opportunity to do elsewhere. I'm also a a huge fan of traveling. Like that was all that motivated me through my life of figuring out what I wanted to do as a career. I just wanted to be able to travel. And so AAA, obviously, that's a little bit more feasible than your homegrown team.
So you've heard it here. It is confirmed. AAA is the Dark Souls of video game development. BQ Overlord asked, how did you score the opportunity with Avalanche?
I'm still like giddy about it. I made the joke to my parents that I was going to print out and frame my letter of offer and just put it on my wall. I've told the team that as well. They thought it was very sweet. By the time I went to apply for Avalanche, I'd already been working in production for about 5 years. I had a fortunate career in that I worked on a lot of games during that time. So that definitely helped when you're going to AAA. If you don't already have AAA experience, they really want to see a couple of published titles. And then I also just had the, I guess, advantage. My old university lecturer is an employee at Avalanche. So when I left Samurai Punk and I was doing my own project for a little bit, I just reached out to him and I was like, hey, I'm looking at maybe going into AAA. How's Avalanche been? And he was immediately like, give me a resume. I'm sending your resume off. So I didn't technically apply for a job. He sort of recommended me, which helped. But I think if you take away the message of I'm lucky because I have a friend who works there, it's the emphasis on he was my university lecturer. We did not just naturally become friends. I left a good impression because I worked really hard in university and I always tried to do my best. So once he left that college and we were both working in the games industry, we were peers because he already had a good impression of me. Yeah.
Okay, next from Sergey Makes a Game Again. How would one go about entering game production? Junior producer is not necessarily the most popular role out there.
It's really tricky. Production is so hard to crack into. It feels like a double-edged sword because indie teams is theoretically indie is the easiest way to get in because it's at that smaller scale. But if an indie team wants a producer, they can't afford to get anyone who can't just come in and kick ass. Like they need someone who knows what they're doing because they can't afford to train someone up, which is where it gets really, really tricky. I'm seeing more studios start to put those entry level positions out there. So I know like Infinity Plus 2 recently did that, which is amazing. Like we need more of that. But yeah, I mean, I would say just getting project management experience in general, like working at EB Games and being a manager there is how I got my job in games because I could prove that I know how to like do rosters, right? I know how to deal with people when someone has a problem. I'd already had all those soft skills of management that made production a little bit less intimidating. So between soft skills of management, games degree, they kind of combined into production. If that makes sense. But it is a very hard way to get in. I'd say communicating to producers that are out there, like generally speaking, we're a tiny little breed that like to meet new people in our same breed. So there's a lot of like production discords and slacks and Facebook groups and everything. So just trying to talk to more experienced producers and seeing if they can at least help nudge you into being in groups where people are talking about production and you can learn from other people.
Good. Do you have any experience with Confluence? Asks Dino Poke.
Yes, a lot. I use a lot of Confluence because it's all under that Atlassian banner of like Jira and Confluence because they communicate very well to each other. Yes. Also, I like strategy games, so I'm very used to wikis and that sort of format. So I personally like it because if I have to onboard a new person, I don't want to have to explain to them everything. I can just be like, go read the basics. It's all on Confluence. So yes, I use Confluence and I do enjoy it.
Okay, I don't think we have any other questions, so we might start bringing things to a close. As always, we are going to head over to the Games with Wings Discord after we shut down the stream. So if you want to go along, Elise, if you have the time, it would be great to have you there as well. I will drop a link to the Games with Wings Discord into the chat now.
I will say Yeah, I was going to say, based on that comment, I was still playing the original Age of Empires game, the original version, where if I tried to save a game, it would be like, you need Windows XP to save a game. I was like, that's fine. I'll just start again. It's cool. I don't need to save my games. It's okay. And I exclusively play on like medium difficulty with large islands with 4 different groups playing at the same time. So I really do like Age of Empires, but I like number 1 better than 2. That's my contentious view for the afternoon.
Well, I'm probably not giving anything away here, but speaking of fun Slack channels in a AAA company, one of the discussions that happened on the Wargaming Sydney Slack recently was about finding Age of Empires in the Kellogg's cornflakes box as a child. So
Yeah,
yes, you've got to have the fun channels.
yeah.
Um, okay, so yeah, thank you very much, everyone. As I mentioned, we are going to be back in the new year with physical ones. So if you're not currently subscribed to this YouTube channel, I would recommend doing that if you want to know when the virtual ones are coming up. Alternatively, we do have a meetup group. I will pop that link into the chat as well. If you do want to attend one of the physical ones, that is the way to find out about them. We organize them through Meetup. So if you head to that Meetup link and then just join the group anytime we've got one coming up, a notification will go out and you'll be able to put yourself down to attend. And yes, aside from that, Elise, a huge thank you to you. I think I echo everyone when I said that was fantastic, it was really interesting. Production, when you're outside, it can seem like this strange dark art and you don't know what people are doing. They're constantly talking about this Jira thing, which I've looked at once or twice, gone, nope, and immediately closed out of it. Even though people occasionally say, Paul, could you do some of your stuff in Jira? You know, maybe put your tasks in Jira. I'm like, no, I've looked at Jira. No, I can't. Um, yes. So how would you convince someone like me to use Jira?
Well, I'd say all the things of like automation, right? That would be a big starter. So it depends on what your tasks look like, but
Everything.
categorize, yeah, categorize your tasks the way you want to. Like I wouldn't make your tasks for you. I would say, let's sit down together in Jira. You make your tasks. I don't care if this task is going to take a month and it's a huge chunk of work. The producer in me goes, no, please don't make a 1 month long task. That's not how it works. You can't do it like that. But this is where it comes down to, it's about you using it so I can get the information I need and not you doing it in the way that suits me as such. So I would sit down with you, create our Jira cards together, and then I would send you a weekly automated message that goes, hey, Paul, have you looked at Jira? Just remember to update your tasks and just slide them into the column that is currently appropriate. How does that sound? Would
I
you do
might
it? Would you entertain it?
I might have to tap one of our producers on the shoulder one day and go, show me this Jira thing. Okay, thank you very much again, Elise. We will close things down now. Head over to the Games with Wings Discord. You can continue the conversation there if you have any other questions for Elise. And yes, I will see you there as well. And if you're not coming to the Games with Wings Discord, I will see you next month for our first talk of 2022. That's scary. Okay, everyone. Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.